Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Today's session is going to be talking about taking the pain out of passwords and adopting multi-factor authentication. I'm Gerald Howland. I'm the CTO here at Mytech, and joining me today and helping produce this session will be Stephanie. She'll be working kind of through this process. As we today's session, we're going to basically kind of go through learning about what SSO is and MFA and how we can help reduce logins and risk based upon this kind of stuff. We'll give you the common problems that we solve and how we attempt to make IT easy through this process. We'll even go through how MFA and SSO work together and make your environment more secure. We'll then give you some recommended next steps and give you an opportunity to ask some questions and do a Q&A at the end here. One of the things that we like to do at the very beginning here is to kind of tell you about Mytech, because a lot of people think that we're actually a training company, but we aren't. We're actually a business and technology consultancy that focuses on the small to medium-sized organizations. Over the last 20 years, we've actually spent a lot of time with our clients identifying their IT challenges and figuring out how to get the most out of their investments. So when we put this all together, we really try to focus on making IT easy and allowing our clients to focus on their business and their clients instead of the IT struggles and challenges that they deal with. So really overall, our goal is to make IT easy and make our clients happy with that. So as we go forward, probably the best way to start this out is, what is the problem? What is the problem that we're trying to face with single sign-on and MFA? And here it is, plain and simple. A survey that was done by LastPass, which is a large password management platform. They did a big survey across their clients and especially their enterprise clients, and found that many small businesses, employees can have as many as 85 passwords and accounts that they need to remember. That's way too many to try to do, right? Even large enterprises that are implementing a lot of these technologies still have 25 unique logins on average. Additionally, they also found out that users they were reusing their passwords on these accounts also. So if we really think about that, how often do you think that they're spending the best time really securing those passwords and making sure that they're not using the same password, and just doing good practices as to what we like to see across the board. So there has to be a fix to doing this, right? 85 accounts, way too many to try to remember. So how do we deal with that, right? That fix, well, it's Excel, right? Everybody loves Excel. We can just put all the data inside Excel. Well, in case you can't tell, I'm joking. We're not going to use Excel. Excel is not the right answer for this. It's what everybody's been using, either Excel or Post-it notes hanging off their monitor. And that's what everybody thinks is secure, but it really isn't. If somebody gets that file, or if that file gets lost or deleted, not only do you have problems with all of your accounts, but it's also gaining access back to those accounts. How do you either remember that you had them or to do that? So what is the real fix to this? Well, there's two different approaches that we can look at. We can either look at a single sign-on platform, or we can look at password vaulting. So what is a single sign-on platform? A single sign-on platform basically centralizes your logins into a single platform or a single login, and then each of the services that you assigned with it actually all come together and use that same login, password, and interface to access those systems. You probably have seen something similar to this by going to even something as simple as Pinterest. You go to Pinterest and you'll see those continue with Facebook or continue with Google. That's a form of single sign-on. You're actually authenticating against your Facebook or your Google account to access Pinterest. You don't have to create a new account. You don't have to create something that's unique. You can use that same login instance that you're doing. We call those entities that are handling all of those usernames and passwords identity providers. That usually gets shortened to IDP, but they provide those authentication and authorization, as we call it in the technical terms, for basically any services that are configured for it or that want to be able to interface with that. In the enterprise space, many times this is actually known as federation. So we're actually federating an authentication system against another. And one of the common languages that is used for this is something called SAML, or the Security Assertion Markup Language. It's basically a modified version of XML that gives the ability for the requesting site to pass, hey, this person is requesting access to this resource, and the IDP to give back, yes, that is authorized, here's the person, they can access that kind of information. The big trick behind this is I can configure multiple services to use the same IDP for all of this, which basically provides me with a same single username and password to access all of that. Many times we also synchronize the same username and password against things like your computer access. So we can actually tie that against your Active Directory domain. And so as you log into your computer, you're using the same username and password to access your computer as you are for all of your primary applications. The other way of handling a lot of this stuff is through password vaulting. So what is password vaulting? Password vaulting is basically a central methodology of storing your passwords and securing them. Basically, it's a big database that's encrypted. So not just like your Excel file, but it's actually encrypted. So you have one key password that lets you access all of your other passwords. It usually combines other technologies to help secure it on beyond just the password. It also gives the ability many times to actually share that information. So can I share that secure information with another employee? So many times organizations find that they have especially small businesses, they have a single account that has access to a service or a vendor that they have. They can use that same account, but they can share the credentials between 2 or 3 employees that actually need to be able to access that. One of the big problems is you still have unique usernames and passwords for each of those accounts, though. So each of those has to be managed and dealt with independently. Many of the password vaulting platforms out there do have features that they add in that actually allow you to do easy password changes. So they'll actually manage password changes for you against sites that they can. So they'll automatically rotate your passwords and change them and keep that information in a secure space for you. So before we go too far, one of the things I want to make sure that we focus on here is really passwords, right? Because this is the first level of protection against a lot of this. And you know, I'm going to kind of get a little hyper about this, but I want to make sure that we start off with a good foot in what we're talking about with passwords. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, even I don't use that on my luggage anymore. But it was a very common password, and it still is. You'd be surprised how often this password shows up in databases that are breached and access and even just attempted. It is still one of the top 20 passwords used on the internet. When we talk about this for security, it's obviously not secure. It's not only easily guessed and very common out there, but it's also what we consider an instant crack. So if we did have to brute force or reverse engineer this password, it would take seconds, if that, even to reverse engineer this. So obviously that's a no-go. So what is our next one? Summer 20. Well, hey, we've got numbers, letters, capitals. That sounds like that'd be really good. It's even actually a pretty decent length, right? But it's still less than 5 minutes to brute force. And we're also using a common word that's a season, no less. So that's automatically in the hacker dictionaries. So that one's out. Let's make it more complex, right? Let's add an exclamation point to the end. Well, we did add some time to it. It takes a little less than 10 minutes to crack now. We still consider that an instant crack capability, but it is, you know, while it's better, it's still using very common phrases, components that are part of the hacker dictionary. These are things that they're going to try right off the bat before they actually get into brute forcing. It's really a pretty simple password. It's not good. So this one. Whoa, this one looks great, right? We've got, you know, it's not easily readable. I've got all sorts of symbols and numbers. It's nice and long. Yeah, you know, it's hard to remember though. It's a funky character set. We're using what they call common substitutions for passwords. This is a problem for anything that we're trying to do. So this one's not good. This would only take about 3 hours to brute force. So what is the answer, right? Even though that's not a good password, there has to be a good password. And what is that good password? Would you believe that this is actually a good password? We have numbers, symbols, uppercase, and it's long. The average to crack something like this is actually pretty close to 50 years. The process to be able to break this is going to take a very long time. We like to call this a true password, right? This is not a single word, but it is getting closer to what I like to call the passphrase. And instead of thinking of words that we want to smash together or a single word to use as our password, we like to use the phrase. So here's even a better example of that. I have symbols, I have numbers, I have uppercase, and it's something very easy to type. Yes, spaces are included as acceptable characters in most platforms. So you can actually type this out exactly as it's shown right there, 60 days until the cool October error. Very easy to type, very hard to crack because of the length, even though we're using common words and they're spelled correctly. This has a total brute force time that's estimated to be over 1,000 years. The chances of anybody even ever being able to crack this are pretty slim. Ultimately, a great password and something that's easy to remember. And even as you change that, you can come up with new phrases. I've heard of people using their favorite passages out of books. A statement that they really like, something that they say all the time. I have a friend that always uses the phrase that his boss always says. It changes all the time, but you use something that you find interesting and that you'll remember whenever you're trying to do this. But so now that we've done passwords, we know what our systems are. We've actually done a good job of this. We're maybe implementing SSO. We've solved a major problem, right? We don't have all these passwords sitting around anymore. We've gone to a good, strong password. We've got a single account, but we've actually got a different problem now. We actually have that single account that is going to be attacked, or somebody is going to try to steal that data from across all of those platforms, right? So how do we secure this? Well, we need to add a layer. And this needs to be more than just a password. So it's more than just something that we can remember or that can easily be forged or stolen from us. We need to be able to identify that I'm the one requesting that information. It needs to be portable. We need to be able to take it with us. Our computers are no longer room-sized machines, so we have to be able to take it with us as we move around. And it also needs to have some flexible usage methods, right? So it can't be a major impact to the user's day-to-day operation. So how do we solve this? We solve this with multi-factor authentication. You may have heard of this before. It's two-factor authentication. It's nothing new. We've been using it for years and years and years. You just don't think about it in this light. So a perfect example of something that you have been using multi-factor authentication for probably many years is an ATM. An ATM, basically, you have two things. You have a ATM card and you have a PIN code. You have something you have and something you know. That is two factors of authentication to gain you access to your banking account. Something that's been in use for a long time. You don't think of it as two factors, but basically the way we look at it. Now, two factors are great, but they're not the end of the process, right? So we have something that in the case of the ATM, we have knowledge, right? Something we know, like our PIN code or our password. We have possession, something we have in our hands, a key, a hard token, something like that. But that's only two of them. There are at least four of them. The common four also include inherence, so something you are. So this is where we get into biometric-based authentication. This is having fingerprints, retinal scans, facial detection, probably using that on your cell phone right now. That's a very common methodology. And also adding, this is a kind of a newer feature coming in, is location. Are you at the office? Are you within the United States? Starting to do those kinds of things. And this is why we're actually calling this multi-factor authentication now, is we're not just using two of these anymore. We aren't just using a PIN and your retinal scan. We aren't just using your PIN and your card. We aren't doing those kinds of things anymore. We're actually doing, we're actually adding these factors together, and especially with the location coming together, where we can do 3 or 4 of these all together, and those 3 start doing things like determining unlikely events. If I know the location you're trying to sign in from, and I'm trying to sign in from someplace in Colorado, and all of a sudden the system tries to detect me signing in from Germany, Is that probably me? Probably not. Can I travel from Colorado to Germany in an hour? At least I can't. But the system's going to detect that and hopefully pick that up and say, hey, this is an unlikely travel event. Somebody has tried to sign in. I'm going to block that second one because it's unlikely. I see a lot of login from Colorado. I might also say, hey, you log in a lot from Colorado. I'm going to exclude you from quite as much authentication process if you're signing in from Colorado again, or signing in from an office area. I can even say MFA is not required if you're signing in from a known trusted area. If you're inside my secure office, I probably assume that you're part of our company and that you're using a secure device already. So when we start talking about what those factors are, especially those hard factors, what are these kinds of devices? So we have hard tokens. This is, anybody who's familiar with the older financial industry probably remembers like the old RSA secure ID tokens. Those devices are what we call TOTP, or time-based one-time passwords. Those codes change on a regular basis, and the identity providing server in the single sign-on platform actually understands what that code is and can determine what that math is to say, yes, this is the right password. Because that password's always changing, it provides us in a nice secure methodology. Smart cards, much like the ATM kind of methodology, same thing as what we're using when you hear about chip and pin on credit cards these days, kind of the same idea. But then we also have devices that are called universal two-factor or UTF devices. That's those little USB keys you're starting to see floating around. And even if anybody's been into the doctor's office or a hospital, probably not lately, hopefully, but you've probably seen them tap a card against a little reader at the terminals, and that card is actually a Bluetooth communicator. So if they actually go too far away from that, it actually locks their session so that they can be within range of that, and that two-factor is constantly authenticating it. So these are typical hard tokens. Hard tokens are really useful. They provide security because you actually have something that you have to provide, but it is something you have to carry around with you. It's something that's not always easily accessible. So how do we solve that? Well, we start using soft tokens. Soft tokens are things that can be the same kind of idea as the TOTP generator. You probably do something similar to this with your bank, where you might get a text message from that service. We call that an SMS version of a TOTP. But they can also do push authentications. And those push authentications, the advantage of that is by pushing that authentication to you, it's not having to kind of enter codes and remember codes, look at two different devices. You can just accept the authentication and then have it come right in. Biometrics, these are items that are using either facial ID, retinal scans, fingerprints, hand scans. You can add all sorts of things. High-end data centers even use weight classing. So the fact that you walk in and on top of a card and a pin that you might be using, they're also identifying your weight to say, hey, did you have a large shift of weight between your last visit and not? They do a lot of those kinds of actions. And then finally, that sign-in location device. This is your GPS location. This is identifying your network that you're coming from, your IP address, all that kind of stuff to see whether or not you're coming from a secure location. So when we use one of these services, I'm going to focus on soft tokens here, but what does an actual login look like? So I'm going to sign into 365. I'm going to basically give you a series of slides here that are going to show how this works. But I'm going to sign into Microsoft 365 as a user. So I'm going to go to the Outlook portal, and I'm going to try to sign in as a user. And when I do this, I'm going to say next. And one of the things that you're going to notice that's a little bit different, instead of it prompting me for a password right away, Microsoft is going to say, hey, wait a sec, you're using an external provider. That identity provider is someplace else. I'm going to send you to that sign-in page. I'm then going to get that sign-in page. This sign-in page is going to be uniquely identified to your portal. So you're going to be able to see that I'm not someplace that I shouldn't be. I'm going to have good security in this scenario. I'll enter my username and password. In this scenario, the username and password is actually synchronized to a domain controller. So it's the same username and password that I sign into a computer with. I click login, and it's giving me an opportunity to say, well, what kind of authentication do you want me to do? In this scenario, I'm going to say push authentication. That push authentication is going to send a code to my cell phone. that cell phone is going to come up and it's going to say, hey, this person's trying to sign in from this location at this time. Is this something you want to allow? Now I can either say allow or deny here. If I say deny, it's going to send a log back to the system saying, wait a sec, this may have been a questionable login. And especially if I'm looking at this, in this scenario, it just gives me an IP address, but many times it'll even give me an actual address or a location, city name at least, saying this is coming from this area. What do I want to do with that? So in this scenario, I'm going to say allow, and immediately I get a response back saying, hey, Microsoft, you're good to go. You know, Passly sent in this case, Passly sent a message back to Microsoft saying, yes, this user's good. Here's the token for them, and I'm allowed to sign back in. That's great, but what happens if maybe my cell phone isn't receiving cell service very well? Maybe I'm in a data center where I can't have cell service running. How would I sign in then? Well, this is where that one-time passcode comes in. This is very similar to that time-based one-time password, or the TOTP style. So in this scenario, I'd go to login, and then when it comes up and asks me what kind of authentication I do, I say one-time password. When I do this, I can actually go into the application, and this is going to give me a one-time password. You may have even done something similar to this with like Google Authenticator. Google Authenticator produces the same one-time passwords, just a different format in the numbers, to do exactly what we're going to do here. I get on my phone, I get my passcode. I can take this passcode, enter in my number, and say verify, and it lets me write in. So really, the user interaction for this, while it can be impactful, it's all about minimizing that. So it's identifying when we want to do these actions and then making sure that it's easy. In this case, the push authentication, most of the time is going to cover the user without a real problem. So how do we move forward with this? First of all, first thing I always recommend, no matter what, because this is critical, audit your password security. Look at what you're requiring people to have. Look at what you're trying to do with your passwords, what you expect your users to have, even yourself. Like I regularly go through my accounts and I say, all my personal accounts, I change my passwords on a minimum of an annual basis, and I make sure that I move them up in the security level every time I do that. Then how do we start moving forward with implementing SSO and MFA in your environment? Well, we start gathering a list of the services that your company uses. There's a lot of services out there that will work with single sign-on, but the problem with them is they maybe have additional licensing that's involved with this. Good example of this is Dropbox. Dropbox does have a single sign-on option, but it's not included in the lower business or free editions. You have to go up into the enterprise packages in order to get single sign-on. Once we identify those services that we might be using, we'll identify what ones support SSO or SAML. Then we need to say, hey, what users are going to be using this platform? We need to identify what users might have problems with this platform. Do we have either staff members that don't have cell phones that we have to worry about hard tokens with? Do we have actions where we have machines that are signing in as a user, but they're not really a user? Perfect example of this is something like your scanner copier type devices. Obviously, MFA, you can't have the copier reaching into its pocket and pulling out a cell phone every time it needs to be able to authenticate it. So how do we do that? And so most platforms, we have a way to bypass that for those kinds of accounts. But it's making sure that we identify that. If we have, maybe we have a CRM or an ERP solution that is sending email messages through the mail server, need to make sure we exclude those. Then this is really a kind of an important part in my book, is we need to make sure that we educate the users as to why we're doing this. Understanding why they are going to have to reach for their cell phone every time they want to sign in, or every so often, why they're going to get bugged by this, why the annoyance is that. Understanding the security implications as to why this is such a big deal is really key in this scenario. And then we need to move forward with the implementation process. And so that implementation process is basically having people register devices, sign into the portals for the first time, and then activating those services so that they work on that new identity provider. So hopefully you enjoyed some of that information and you learned something. One of the things that we want to point out is we've got some future sessions coming up. One this Thursday, where we're going to have the Teams Microsoft 365 and Teams Power User Group. This this week we're going to be actually focusing on editing SharePoint pages. This is really focused towards people in your organization that are power users. We don't define, power users are not necessarily administrators, but they're the users in your company that really focus on adoption and helping your company make the right IT decisions. And then we have one next Tuesday on collaborating with external partners, so using guest access channels in Microsoft Teams, how to efficiently do that, and how to work with people outside of your company and collaborate with inside teams. So definitely check those out. We will send links in the follow-up email that we'll send after this program for more information, or check out our events page for more details. So I want to thank you all for attending. If we've kind of hit the half-hour point. If you need to drop off, go ahead. But we will be open for questions if you have any. You can, if you look at the chat panel on the side, go ahead and type in your question, and we'll be happy to attempt to answer it here.
Awesome. Thank you, Gerald. While we give everybody just a moment here to go ahead and type any questions that they have, can you elaborate a little bit more on just, we talk a lot about kind of balancing ease of use and security. Others have heard us talk about that before, and sometimes things that are more secure tend to be a little bit more cumbersome for users. Can you kind of talk about some of the installations we've done on MFA and kind of what the user experience has been and for that organization?
Yeah, so this is part of that identifying your applications, right? So as you're identifying those applications that would use SSO and MFA, we also want to look at those applications for what is the risk profile of that. So if we look at some of our remote control tools, we obviously want to make sure that those are super secure. So we might actually set a different profile on it than what we would do for just a common everyday application. And we can specify different kinds of rules behind it. So we might say that you can only sign in from certain environments, or that you can only sign in from, you have to use MFA every time you sign in versus, once a week or once every other week that we do in a lot of our cases right now. So if I'm signing in from a computer that I already feel is secure, adding that additional layer of security on it, it might not necessarily benefit unless it sees something odd, and that's where some of the advanced intelligence kind of comes into the processing.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them. We'll take another couple minutes just to make sure we answer any of those questions. Gerald, can you talk about, like you were saying about, like, for instance, the example, the ATM, that we've been using two-factor authentication for years, but there seems to be quite a big push in the industry and the security right now for moving to multi-factor. Can you kind of talk about, I think even some of our vendors are requiring it for security purposes, any compliance or regulations, and why it's just becoming something that you must have. And even Mytech, we're including it in our programs going forward because we just believe it's that important to have. So can you kind of talk a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so the risks around passwords are just too great these days. No matter how secure your password is, people are getting it either through phishing attacks or forging websites. So they're catching where you maybe type in a website wrong, and then they have a fake version of it that they can ask you to enter in your username and password and then get that cred. Because they have those usernames and passwords, even breach databases. There's like in the last month, I think there's been something like 40 announced breaches where companies have had infrastructures where passwords have gotten out, usernames and passwords have gotten out across their whole company, their whole service base. And so we're talking about millions of usernames and passwords that are out there. This is why reusing usernames and passwords are such a risk. If I'm constantly reusing those same usernames and passwords, then we see one of those breached accounts that's on another service could be a risk to us. So definitely making sure that those passwords are separate and identifying why we would want to kind of separate those out.
Awesome. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions today, so I guess just thank you everybody for coming. Any last words, Gerald?
Stay safe out there, and you make sure you have safe, secure passwords, and use the MFA whenever possible.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.